as we get ready to hop on, tell us a little bit about what has this quarantine experience been like for you guys? Like, do you have your top mom moment of like, was really shining in this moment and I did this thing and I felt like I've nailed this quarantine because of this one project that I did with my family or whatever. So anything come to mind?
We survived.
We survived.
Thank you. There you go.
Hallelujah.
That's it. No one got hurt.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had early on, I had this idea that we were going to have a painting night with Bob Ross, and we like YouTubed a Bob Ross painting, and I set all of my teenage children around this table, and it was this, and I was like, oh, this is going to be so fun. And then it was over. It was like, okay, I have nothing left. I've exhausted all of my creative resources, and now I have these ugly canvases because none of us can paint. And I feel like I need to put them somewhere in my home. And so, but yeah, that was like my shining moment. And I think that was like day 5 of quarantine. So yes.
It was downhill from there.
I know.
Yeah, I can't
It was
think
so
of
long
any.
ago. I can't even, because
I
we
know.
started shut down in like February. So it's like eons ago. I don't
That's
even
right.
remember that.
So what is the climate like where you guys are now? Things still shut down, opened up, back to normal?
I mean, I think for
yeah,
us,
I'm in Eastern
the
Asia,
unique part is,
and still a few pockets that can't.
I think
Yeah, Jenny, what about you?
I think for us, it's been a little unique in a way because Iceland actually didn't shut down fully. We had limitations on gatherings, we had things like that, but because they've been so, I think, aggressive with tracing people, they did their best to not shut down the schools as much as they could. They limited classrooms and split kids across like the buildings if they could, and split things like that. But they actually didn't. There's probably about a week or so, or even 2 weeks, where they were kind of shut down. Everything was closed up, and then after that, they slowly, steadily opened back up because they didn't want the kids' routine to be adjusted as much. And in Iceland, you can't homeschool, so I mean, so all the kids are in school. So yeah, so that was actually unique to be able to at least during that middle of the day, the kids to be able to go to school for a few hours. Yeah, so that was I was thankful for that.
No kidding. So no homeschool at all. That
No, you can't homeschool. No. There's a friend of mine who is actually going to school now to kind of study more about homeschool to try to even, I think, push it maybe in the future. But otherwise, there's not homeschool. You can't. So yeah,
Wow.
you have to kind of if your kids are registered, it's one thing if you're coming to visit, but since we live here and all that, so they all attend school. And then the younger ones are encouraged to, you can make a choice there, but for the most part, the younger ones are encouraged to go to preschool. So, which we did for our younger two, so that they can get a handle on the language better and have fun and play and all that. So it's been, it's been interesting. I was a little nervous about that when we first moved to Iceland because of just, just different, culture and what's allowed maybe to be taught or things like that. But thankfully it's worked out well.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole topic on how do you decide how to school your children overseas. I think that is a topic every mom wrestles through as far as what's the best and how do you help your kids make friends, and boarding school versus homeschool versus local school, and so many topics and questions. And when you have a country that absolutely restricts some of that, it helps you make that decision a little better, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so you don't like being restricted, but then you're like, okay, you just trust
that is just
process.
Not an option. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Jesse, I know you were a TCK before you founded Kaleidoscope. What was your schooling situation like?
Yeah, this is one of the questions that we get all the time from TCK parents. And it's so funny because my parents didn't do this intentionally, but they really prepared me for this question because I did everything, like every option, I did it. I went to local kindergarten. I went to a dance specific school for a couple years. I homeschooled. I went to international school, like the smaller international school. I did online schooling. I did homeschooling. And then I graduated from like the big official international school that was non-Christian. And so I literally,
So you just
the only thing I didn't do was boarding school.
So you can just speak into all of that. So did you hear that, moms out there? Any questions you have, just pelt Jessie with them. But
And the thing is, like, they were all great. You know, they were all
Yeah.
hard and they were all good in
Yeah.
a variety of ways. And I think that's what I always come back to is like, you know,
Mhm.
everything's going to have a little bit of a challenge and everything's going to have some benefits.
Absolutely.
And when it comes down to it, it's probably not that big a deal.
Sarah, how is it going? Are we up and running?
Yes, we are. We've got about 25 people with us.
That's fantastic. Well, I just want to take a minute to welcome everybody. If you are able to catch this live, we are really excited to interact with you. We welcome your questions and your comments. We feel like this is a really important conversation to have. And we have done our best to grab some really great guests to help speak on this topic today about how to talk to your TCKs about racial diversity. So I'm just going to kind of go around and introduce who our Summer Life crew is today. So because I don't know how it's going to show up on your screen. If I say your name, just give away. So Sarah Hilkeman is a project coordinator here with Velvet Ashes, and Sarah's going to be watching those Facebook comments. So if you have any questions you would like to ask one of our guests, or comments or suggestions or things that have worked really well for you that you'd like for us to speak on, just put those comments in there, and Sarah's gonna do her best to help us include them in our topic as we chat today. Jessie Vance is coming to us from the States, from the East Coast. She is, Jessie, I keep saying director. What is your title? Founder?
Technically founder and CEO.
Founder and
All of the
CEO
above work.
of Kaleidoscope. So Kaleidoscope really focuses on how to equip you to help your TCK survive, thrive, and do really well in this great life that they have a chance to live. So Jessie, they do lots of conferences, they write curriculum, they provide lots of different ways to encourage and equip you and your TCK. So we are so thrilled to have Jessie here helping us speak on this topic today. And Jenny Erlingson is coming to us from Iceland today. And Jenny, we are thrilled to have you here, and we can't wait to hear about where you are, what you're doing, how you're serving your family, and all of that. So I'm going to give you a chance here in just a minute to kind of introduce yourself as well. And Ashley's coming to us from Asia, and we recognize, Ashley, that you are up the latest of all of us. And so thank you so much for saving some brain power for us tonight. And we also want to just say, we know the internet could be an issue, and we are just going to do our best to help this conversation happen. I'm having a really bad storm where I'm Denise Beck. I'm the executive director here at Velvet Ashes, and I'm smack dab in the middle of America right now, where we are having a really bad storm this morning. And so if my internet goes off and I disappear, these lovely ladies are going to be able to just continue this conversation on. But we recognize all of us, wherever we are could face some internet issues as well. So one thing I want to say is, before we even get this topic started off, is that we do not want to come as experts on the topic of racial diversity. What we recognize as women who have lived overseas, are living overseas, are raising or have raised third culture kids, is that this topic of racial diversity, as it happens to those who are living in America, looks one way. As it happens to moms who are raising kids who live and belong in one passport country and live in another passport country, the topic takes a little bit of a different turn, and we have to think about it a little different. The questions we're asking are a little bit different. And so what we want to do today is just recognize that there is a whole community of moms who are having a slightly different conversation about this, and they are so far apart and sometimes disconnected. We wanted to create a platform for you to get on, ask your questions, talk about how you're processing this, talk about the questions your kids are asking and how you're choosing to deal with this, and just be a place for a conversation to happen. So that's really our heart about this today, is just recognizing there's a little bit of a different conversation going on here, and we want to help people to hear that. So with that, I would love for each of our guests to just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself in a way that maybe I didn't. Tell a little bit about where you are, who you're serving, your family, and then we'll just hop right in. So Jessie, why don't you start us off?
Sure. You gave me a great introduction. So my name is Jessie, and I grew up in Central Asia as a third culture kid. I was one of the TCKs that basically lived in the same place my whole life. I didn't do the jumping around as much. So that was my TCK experience. And out of that, out of this small community, and my family worked with a really small organization. So there weren't a lot of resources or support system for myself and my siblings and my TCK friends. And out of that experience, I was like, wow, there's really like, we can do better at this. I was missing something as a TCK, and I wanted to be that for other TCKs. So that's how Kaleidoscope got started. And like Denise said, we support families and third culture kids to thrive in their overseas experience. And I currently I'm currently in New York for the summer, which is really interesting place to be. And I have 3 brothers. I love coffee. Yeah, this is like, I know we all got it. Yeah, really, really excited and humbled, actually just like very nervous to be part of this conversation. I think it's such an important conversation to have, and also so nuanced, and like the international community has also like not done a really awesome job of addressing racial diversity or racism in the ways like in our communities as well. So I think it's like so important to be having this conversation, but and coming at it just from like, okay, let's figure it out together. And I'm grateful for this space. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us, Jessie. We really appreciate what you're going to bring to this today.
Oh, yeah,
Jenny,
and I don't have kids. I'm not a mom.
Okay, yes. No, that's good. That's good to know, because I mean, honestly, it takes a village, right? We did a series on that about how I was totally reliant on other people in different stages, ages, and times of life to help me with my kids. So I value that as well. Jenny, tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, your family.
Hey, I'm Jenny, and it's so good to be on and get to share and discuss and figure this out too, and process everything that's been going on. But I was born and raised born in Huntsville, Alabama, but moved around a little bit in the States. My parents are actually both Nigerian, so there's a level of, even as we talk about TCKs and third culture, I just realized it hit me while you were talking, Jessie, that I think what do they call them? Is it first generation or second generation Americans, where your parents are basically immigrants and then you're born? And so there was a level growing up too where fitting in, I'm not just a Black American, I'm like literally an African, Nigerian American. And so I just was kind of chewing on that as she was talking and sharing about third culture. But anyway, so went to college actually for social work, did a little bit of that, but worked at a church for about 12 years, junior high pastor and women's ministry, help and assistant. And then God called our family to Iceland. So my husband is actually Icelandic. And when we got married, I told him I would never move to Iceland. And I didn't think we would, because he was really involved in inner city work in the community and all that. But things shifted. So we've been in Iceland for 2 years in the north. And we are not under an organization. We are with our church, kind of under that, but also coming just to be part of the community, to serve, to learn, to partner with other people here who are doing different things. And so it looks like church support, it looks like coaching basketball is what he's been doing. And then a lot of what I've been doing is continuing to write, which I love to do. And so I've written 2 books, and my second one I wrote here. And I write a lot about identity, because I think identity, and I'm sure it'll come up even in this conversation, is something that is a good foundation for, I think, all of us when you're approaching different topics and in situations of just kind of, where's your anchor at? Where is your anchor, or are you defined by what you do? Are you even fully defined by even your culture or your race or your country, all that. What should be your core definition and who you are, and then how does that then speak to all the different things you're a part of? So I write about that a lot, and so then it lends into just even online and me kind of continuing that conversation, especially in relation to women, with Milk and Honey Women, which is a website that I started a few months ago, just to kind of write more, discuss more, and just see what that looks like for all of us. So yeah, so I'm just kind of figuring this thing out with my kids and my husband, which is I feel very blessed to be where his home country is, but it's different for him too, because he was in the States for 16 years. So that's now he is now a third culture person as well, you know. So it's been really interesting and challenging and fun to
Jenny,
walk
how
this
many
out.
kids do you have?
I have 4, 8,
kids.
6, 4, and 2. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. That's great. Ashley, can you fill us in on you? How's it going? Where you're at, your family, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, so we moved to East Asia 10 years ago.
Wow.
So we were young bucks moving with our 1-year-old at the time. Now he's 11, which is crazy. So we have an 11-year-old, almost 9-year-old, 2 boys, and then a 5-year-old girl. And my husband's African American, so we do have, I don't know how many. How do you describe that many culturals that they're experiencing all at the same time? I don't even know. But yeah, born and raised in Branson, Missouri, actually not far from where Denise is. So very small town America. And met my husband in Kansas City at college, and yeah, we both felt called to serve overseas, and so we've been here. The first 9 years we were with a pretty big org, teaching English on college campuses. And just last year we switched orgs to do some other things. We're still figuring out. Actually, we're studying the local language again because it's quite difficult. Yeah, we'll see what the Lord prepares for us to do, but this org allows us to kind of spread our wings a little bit and get involved in some different areas besides education. So we shall see.
Well, it seems like we have a really good crew here to start this conversation, and I'm really excited to get into this. So one of the things, so when I served on the field for 5 years in Uganda and South Sudan, and so when I think about if I was still there raising my kids, this racial diversity conversation would look really different when I'm raising, when we are the minority in a country. And so I know that where you live affects how this conversation is playing out with your family, with your children. So what does it look like for you where you are right now, and just the racial diversity conversation for the country that you're living in?
Wow. That's it's hard to pinpoint, I think, for us sometimes, because of course, like, I'm in the minority without doubt, and then my kids are too, because they're biracial, and so you don't see as many. But I think, and I weigh it or try to balance it between how I felt sometimes in the States and how I feel here. And so the climate is that there are the issues as far as especially immigrants and different foreigners, and sometimes it looks like, whether it's those from Africa or from places in South America or other parts of Europe, there's issues there. But I find there's more the animosity sometimes, or the underlying, I can't even explain it, atmosphere of tension is not as prevalent here. And I don't know if it's because you didn't have the history of whether it's slavery and all that like you do in the States, and then all the different things, segregation, that were in the States. But there's more curiosity, and there's definitely differences for sure that really stand out. And so so the climate hasn't though felt as burdensome. I don't know if that makes sense in a way as we've walked through it, but it's just been more of these highlighted differences that we've kind of been walking our kids through.
Ashley, what about you? What's it feel like where you're at?
Yeah, actually very similar. When we walk out the door, our family, all as one unit, we blow minds. We just blow minds. The country we serve in, I think it's over 90% of one ethnic group, and then there are 52 minority groups that make up the other less than 10%. And so, yeah, they all look like each other, act like each other. They've been like this for thousands of years. And so we blow minds everywhere we go. And it's mostly well received. Like you said, Jenny, it's mostly curiosity and just being naive, not knowing, not being exposed. This country had their borders closed for decades, and so they didn't see any foreign faces. I mean, the grannies and grandpas here, we are the first foreign face they have ever seen. And even other younger people, they've never interacted with anyone besides their own people. So we try to always keep that in the forefront of our mind, that even if whatever they say to us is discriminatory, flat out racist, that from a place of not knowing and not being exposed. Not saying we don't take those moments to maybe educate a little bit and plant some things to maybe begin to think about. But yeah, I don't think there's been one experience where we felt like, oh, they're really trying to get to me, to be nasty. I mean, it's just not that. So it's unique because they don't have a lot of diversity, but yeah, at the same time they're curious.
So I'm interested, Ashley, you've been there, you said 10 years, and I'm assuming, that you've also been back to the States a couple of times during that, hug some family members' necks. And Jenny, you have just been in Iceland for 2 years. How is the conversation different, or do you notice a difference in your heart, feelings about your family, your children, when you are stateside? Is there a difference?
I mean, I think there's definitely what you feel in the atmosphere, and thankfully, and I've experienced probably different things, pockets here and there, but I think thankfully we were, for the most part, in a church that was very diverse, and even in the city, even though it's Alabama, so people have an assumption, but especially like I would say the north of Alabama, there's a lot of diversity in those places and all that, but you would have the differences, especially I think when my kids would hear conversations or see things, and then conversations with people, because I mean, you do have the ones whose parents were a part of segregation or had certain mentalities. And so I've had definitely, without doubt, way more conversations with people, and even being in Iceland now, even more conversations with people as they've said, well, oh, what about this? Or, I'm so sorry for this, or, what do you think about what's going on? And I've had way more because I think it's like the blank or the covers being lifted off of maybe mindsets or perspectives that people didn't even realize they had, or things they didn't understand, or assumptions. And so so it is interesting going back, or at least conversating with people who are back in the States, and to have this, and I don't know if this is similar for you guys, to be in a different country and then have this different perspective where you're not just weighing the racial diversity issues in the States, but like you're seeing like internationally and globally, like what's taking place, and you see like, oh wow, they've gotten it right here, or or just whatever that looks like. And so it's been really interesting to see the differences, to see both of that and to weigh it. And I can't explain it, but it's I don't even know if it's a deeper grief. I don't know if that makes sense in a way, because it's like you're on the outside looking in. And so you're dealing with people maybe who are curious about, wow, what's going on in the States, or, why is this fight? Are they trying to get Black Power? What's going on? So you have these questions of curiosity and just maybe not the full knowledge. And then you have other conversations with people who are in it and all that. And so you just feel this kind of weight, grief of seeing something from the outside looking in, and seeing the weaknesses and seeing the burdens and feeling that, but being not powerless, because we're not, but not able to really tangibly, physically engage in it. I don't know if that even makes sense, but it's almost been harder in a way, more of a struggle in a way to see both.
Ashley, well, one of the things I want to get to a question for Ashley, but I do want to know our audience on Facebook Live, if you have an experience with your culture, like where you're living, that's different than what we're talking about, we'd love to hear about that. If you happen to live in a country that's, you know, a majority of Black people, how are they hearing this stuff that's happening in America? How are you interacting with questions or conversations that are going on in relation to what news and stories and things are coming out of America in relation to this topic? But Ashley, as you look at your kids, are they asking any questions about this? Is this something that they even know that's happening? You know, is this a conversation that you have? What does that look like in your family?
Mhm. So I'll start by saying, you know, every family is different and you have to, you know, figure out what works for your family. We tend to protect our kids' innocence as long as we can. So, you know, out on the streets, I field all of the comments for them because it's in the local language and they're not quite there yet. So I'm actually thankful that they don't understand yet, because I do get questions a lot of comparing their skin colors or asking about hair or whatever. And so yeah, we've chosen to wait until we're closer to going back. We usually go back every 2 years. So even with lots of things going on recently, we've shielded them from it, just because they're still fairly young, and we just feel like emotionally they're not quite there. Maturity level, they're not quite there yet. Of course, we have many other conversations about diversity and things like that, but actual events that have happened, we've just protected them from that for now. Now this time next year we'll be back there, and my oldest will be 12, and I think we'll have to start having some of those harder conversations about what people may think of him just because of what he looks like. And it breaks my heart to think about having those conversations with him, because it's just not fair. But it's a reality that he'll have to accept and live in for the time being, until more changes can happen, I suppose. But yeah, that's what we've chosen to do, is just protect their innocence for a while longer.
Sarah, is there anything that we could address for people that are listening?
No, we don't have any comments or questions yet,
Perfect.
Specifically, but so yeah, if you have them, go ahead and put those in the comments.
Jenny, what would your hopes be for a perspective that you're creating for your kids about this? When we raise kids globally, I've noticed with my 4 kids that I have, you know, raised in Africa and then brought back here, is that they look at the world entirely differently than their friends, and they don't see America and things that are happening here as the only thing that's happening in the world. They're reading Al Jazeera and BBC, and things that are happening all over the world are things that they're considering, and not just one news source. And so as you look at, you know, raising your kids overseas, what perspective are you hoping that they have with this topic? And, you know, even a little bit into Ashley's thing too, what have you decided with your kids in this conversation, and how are you having that?
I guess I'll answer that second part first, because things have trickled in for sure. And even as the kids, you know, it's hard to hide when we're listening to news articles or seeing things, and the kids say, "Oh, what's going on there?" And so I've tried to do my best to, as I explain, if they catch something that, you know, this happened. There's people who don't like other people because of the color of their skin, and this will happen. I said, but you know, but it doesn't mean, like, it's really like really emphasize, doesn't mean that all these people are bad, all these people are wrong, especially, like, doesn't mean that, like, say, as you've seen, even police officers or people in authority, doesn't mean people in authority, everyone is bad or wrong. And I said, you know what, honestly, I said, people sometimes are broken and they do things, you know, for whatever reason. So we kind of discuss that as it comes up. Yeah, because I don't want to throw them in the deep end of all that, because there's a lot of fear that can be stirred up with that. And we are big on trying to eliminate fear whenever we see it in our kids, for whatever reason. So we, when it's necessary to bring up for whatever reason, or even like the first few months we were in Iceland, my son wanted to cut his hair completely straight and flat because of the kids in school all having straight hair, you know, and kind of pointing out his curls and his differences. And I think for them, being newly in Iceland, they didn't want to be, you know, they knew they couldn't do anything about their skin, but they didn't want to be so different where they stood out. Does that make sense? And it's beginning to teach them. So I guess this conversation is specific to events, but also it's a lifestyle, you know, for a lot of us, but teaching them that your differences are beautiful and you don't have to hide or be ashamed of your differences. And that, I know it's hard because you don't want to stand out. You want to kind of, as you're adjusting to a new culture, you want to kind of just, you know, not be center stage, but we want you to embrace what God gave you, what he gifted you with. And so now, I mean, they love, you know, he's got his little mohawk haircut with his little curls and he's good. But so, yes, I think what I hope that they get as far as being in the country is to really value their uniqueness, to really value the fingerprint of God on them. And that's what I want. I think even as I talk about identity, that's the big conversation, is that you are a child of God. You belong to God first and foremost. And so he created every part of you. It's beautiful. I have to deal with that even with among my girls. I have literally, my kids have 4 different hair types. So, and I just went through a day of detangling hair, and it was, God help me. It's always fun, you know, but and when my daughter says, well, she has better hair than me, or because why? Because her hair is, you know, maybe softer or not as curly. I'm like, no, your hair is gorgeous. It's beautiful. You know what you can do with your hair. So even among siblings, I want them to know that how they were created and formed and knit together, that that is how they were meant to be by the Lord, and to really value that. So my prayer is that as they come out of this and they get older, that they value these differences. It's not better or worse. It's not, you know, because someone has lighter skin or darker skin or different hair. No, it's just the fingerprint of God on them, and valuing those perspectives and the cultures. And let me just say this real quick before I close. I've always been one too, because in the States, a lot of times when you have a biracial child, people will automatically say, well, that child is Black. Even the birth certificate, that child is Black. But for me, and not everyone else feels this way, but for me, I always wanted them to understand, no, you are Black and white, you are Nigerian and Icelandic. You know, that I don't want you to ever deny a part of your culture just because of what society says, you know, whether it's fear from that's how they'll see you, or if it's just like that's who you are automatically. No, like, no, you are a mix of cultures, and it's beautiful. And I never want them to be locked into just one definition, where they can't value the Icelandic part. Thank God they're getting to value the Icelandic part now. I never want them to not even know or value the Nigerian part, the part that makes them Black, if you will. So that's important. So I think I want them to be grounded in identity, and I want them to have value for their differences and for the differences in others that they see around them.
What I love about what I'm hearing from both of you is that you are a living example of Ephesians 4:1-3, of Romans 12:18, of unity. And you are teaching that in your family. You are, through your life, through your gentle conversations, Ashley, that you're having with people that are asking questions. You are living out, this is what it looks like to be unified in Christ. And I love that. I want to talk a little bit about, you know, just that when it does come to the time. So when Ashley decides next summer, or whenever, we hope airlines allow people to travel, that's another thing, you know, just being American and not being able to fly a lot of places right now. But if you get to, you know, and you need to start having these conversations, the way that TCKs view themselves, the way that they process information, the way that they enter into a new situation, a new country. You know, Jesse, what have you found in your conferences and your time that you spend with TCKs, you know, when it is time to start having these conversations, what's a great way to do that? How are they receiving information?
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh, so much good stuff. You guys are bringing up like a couple thoughts for me. I love that both of you have biracial kids and that you're like bringing that perspective. Something I've been thinking and kind of like reconciling for myself. I'm a, you know, white girl from a white family and grew up in a country that was like kind of a melting pot situation. It was part of the old Soviet Union. So you had like Russian influence and like Central Asian influence and Middle Eastern influence and all of this. And I also like just like visibly fit in. Like, you know, people would ask me like, oh, are you Turkish? Or like they would just, they couldn't quite figure it out. But also like I wasn't very, very visibly different from my local peers. So I got the privilege of like, you know, not being a standout minority, you both within my host culture and like the expat community. And something I talked about a little bit recently is like even though we had this like mix of cultures in different ways within the country I was living in, I had never like interacted with a Black person. Like I don't have a memory until I was 18 and moved to New York of actually like interacting with a Black person in real life. And then just recently I had this like visceral memory that actually my first boyfriend had dark skin. He is Pacific Islander, and so he doesn't identify as Black. He identified as colored. I don't know if he like still considers that the correct term or not, but that's what he told me at the time. But he had like, you know, much darker skin, and I had this visceral memory of like introducing him to my family and my brothers making all of these jokes about like, oh, like mom and dad aren't gonna like him, like careful what, you know, like all like now looking back, I'm like just overtly racist comments that no one talked, like we didn't address. My parents didn't stop those jokes from being made. I didn't realize what was happening, like just all of these things. And now looking back as a 32-year-old woman, I'm like, oh, wow, that happened and that wasn't addressed. And just like something that I've been processing and reconciling for myself is even though, you know, I didn't grow up in America and I didn't, and I grew up as a TCK thinking like I had this great worldview and I'm so familiar with so many cultures and I'm so accepting of so many people, and like all third culture kids can't be racist because like we know so many different cultures and we're used to being the minority and all of that stuff. And then recognizing like this one instance, and I'm sure there were other instances in my family, this one just like came to mind really vividly, where the culture from my American, you know, our American media or movies or my parents maybe, like I don't know where these things come from. And this is part of like, you know, what we're all learning and unlearning and dismantling right now. But recognizing like I didn't grow up in a school with like white kids and Black kids and like feeling the tension there, and still somehow my brothers like knew how to make a joke about the color of my boyfriend's skin. And so when we're talking about like having these hard conversations with TCKs, I just wanted to say and acknowledge like we still receive these messages. We still learn them somehow, whether we are the minority or whether we're, I don't like, you know, whatever circumstances we're living in, somehow those messages still come across. And it is like, again, I don't have kids, so I can say this from a very unique perspective. And like, it was really interesting for me to hear y'all's heart and like, we want to protect our kids. We don't want to be having these conversations. And my perspective as an adult TCK is like, have the conversation. Like you need to be having them because we're hearing the stuff. And like when I was growing up, I didn't have social media. I like remember getting on the web, like an American Girl website. That was the first thing that I Googled when I was 12 or 13 years old. And those were, but so I wasn't receiving the same information that your kids are probably receiving now just from the internet. But somehow like we were still getting those messages. So I do think that it's from my perspective. And so, you know, protect your kids. Like you guys know best. I always say parents know best, but just from the other perspective, I wish that I had had those conversations earlier. And I wish that my parents had identified like, wow, that's not okay to say out loud, or let's talk about like why that was hurtful. Or like this happened in a movie we watched, like why do we not agree with it? Because and so I do like, I think that all kids are getting those things, and specifically for TCKs, like when we work with TCKs, I'm just always so impressed with their like awareness and their worldview. And when I was like preparing for this conversation yesterday, I'm still wrapping my head around like, what is racism? What is racial diversity? What are we trying to encompass here? And something I wrote down is racism says you're different and you don't belong. Does that ring true?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And third culture kids get that. Like they get that in a really real way. And I'm biased. I always say third culture kids have superpowers. There's certain things that we learn innately as kids growing up cross-culturally. And one of those is a deep sense of empathy to the world around us. And third culture kids see things and see like inequalities in really unique ways. And our empathy is a superpower that I believe is like something that will promote or that can promote change. But like as parents and as the other adults, the cheerleaders and the caregivers and just the friends, like the mentors, it's our job to activate that empathy into like something in someone who wants to create change. But like framing racism that way was like, wow, this is like, I totally get this. And I think that third culture kids as young, like we talk about identity and belonging, just like you were saying, Jenny, and those concepts are so obvious. Like TCKs get those and feel those and ask such poignant questions and start such poignant conversations that I'm like rambling now because I'm feeling so passionate about this topic. I'm like sweating.
But what I'm hearing is that, you know, the conversation is going to look different. So maybe if you have a teenager, you are actually sitting across from them after you watch a movie together intentionally, because you know it's going to prompt emotion in them. It's going to prompt a great conversation that you can actually sit down and have. But, you know, if you have 5-year-olds, there are stories being written and there are books about this concept. And, you know, so maybe it's even just including them and authors who are Black and things like that, just so that it's not a direct conversation that you're having, but it is, you know what, this has been a part of our family, you know, topic since they were little. And it's not awkward to then just start the conversation, because really it's been happening. It's just been subtle all along, you know, until they're appropriate.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because there is like representation is so important. I think that's part of my story, is that like Black people were only represented by Hollywood to me. And that's not a message that we want to be portrayed like that. We don't want that to be the only message that we're portraying until we see like change in the media industry. But if my children's books had more representation in them, that would have been a different, like I would have associated Black people with like those stories and not just, you know, whatever Hollywood had decided to show me. So I love that.
Do you all have, so I have a couple of thoughts here. You know, number one, just are there any books or are there any people that you trust that like, hey, this is a list of things that I trust, that these are books that, you know, it's just tangible. Like if maybe I haven't started doing that, but I want to now, you know, do you have any recommendations for those types of things you can start integrating into your family?
I know for my family, I had ordered some, and then I had friends who sent me more, but because, you know, like we were talking about, you have the specific conversations when events happen, but I think for a lot of us, I think probably for all of us with TCKs and those of us ourselves in those situations, it is like a ongoing conversation. It becomes more of a lifestyle. So it's hard to even pinpoint moments to have conversation, because in a way it's been a lifestyle. And so you're trying to, weave it in. But I knew I wanted to make sure the kids, especially being in Iceland where they were going to be the minority. So I like ordered some more books. There's one called Little Leaders, like a picture book, Little Leaders, Little Legends. And they're just talking about just these notable people in African American history. It's hard to say, even in this context, African, just American, because there's international and global, and there are some of those people in there as well. But just like, you know, Black leaders and, you know, who may not have been covered in history books, you know, who may not be out there. And so those books, they're just beautifully, they're so cute. The girls and love looking through them. My son, he loves throwing it, but he looks through it every now and then. But I so agree with representation. I think that is vital. We have to have more, whether it's the dolls. Like I love when I see, like, say, white families or European families here have several different like Black dolls within their kids' collection, or, you know, superheroes or whatever, because it then it helps the kids, especially if they're not interacting with people of another race. It helps them to see the beauty and the value in these skin tones and this textures of hair and all that, even before so it doesn't become like this intentional, just this lifestyle growing up thing of just that beauty of that skin tone, that color, that style of hair, you know, you know, I remember the times of even coming here, like, oh, your hair, like, what is that? You know, like just braids or twists, it's just different, you know, it's not less than, it's not ugly. So when you can do that from small ways, whether it's the shows that you watch or the books that you bring in, the dolls and toys you have, especially thinking about age appropriateness, then you can, I think, weave in those conversations without exposing them to something that's negative. And then, of course, as they get older. So off the top of my head, those two books I think are just great for history-wise and for representation that way. But there may be, whether it's Asian culture or you know, Latin American culture, whatever, there may be some different ones out there too to help broaden the representation for lots of different people.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a list. I think Sarah has the link for it. That's a list of culturally diverse children's books. And it's not Kaleidoscope's list. It's one that I just found online, but we'll share it anyways. And I love it because I had noticed this. I love reading young adult books. Like, they're just so nice and easy to read. So I still read them. But more and more, the stories and the authors are like a broader range of diversity and races and backgrounds. And that's so cool for third culture kids because we're seeing our story represented as well. And even if it's, you know, through the lens of like an immigrant family moving to the US and experiencing the third culture in that way, there's still so many similarities that we see in ourselves. So I love the children's book list is awesome. It has a bunch of Black authors, but also like Latinx and Asian and all sorts of different stories. And, you know, some of them like take a tour around the world, which is so cool for third culture kids because it's like talks about, one of them is everyone cooks rice. And have you heard of that? And it's like all the different ways that families prepare rice, and just again celebrating both the differences and like we're all human, we all eat rice. I don't have recommendations for young adult books. I'm working on that. By that I mean I'm sitting on the beach and reading them for you guys, doing the hard work.
Nice.
But yeah, working on getting a young adult list that is both like has more diverse cultural perspectives and specific to the third culture kid experience. But even if you just like go into, you know, Amazon young adult section, there's so many great stories about different backgrounds because I've just been noticing that like those books are coming up. So there's a lot of good ones out there.
So one of the other perspectives here is, you know, that there are women on the field who don't have, you know, biracial children and they're just serving, and maybe they don't have the contact with Black friends that can help them understand more about, I don't even know where to start with this conversation. I know it's important. I'm isolated from the conversations that are happening and I just don't know how to have and start those conversations with my family. And I want to say that, you know, just because we aren't, maybe you find yourself in a group of only white women and you feel like, well, I don't feel equipped to have this conversation and I don't want to be called out for having it in the wrong way. That doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't have the conversation with your kids and you shouldn't start talking about it. And one resource that I have found, so there's this thing called the Culture Translator. It's an email that my husband and I get, and it just brings to light things that are happening in culture that your kids are probably hearing about, watching, and it helps as a parent for you to understand, well, what's the background of that? How can I talk to my children about that? And so my husband's hysterical because he'll like bring up the latest song by somebody that I don't even know, and my kids are like, how do you even know about that, Dad? And so like he feels pretty cool because he's like, oh yeah, I'm in. But one of the things that recently came out in that was about how to parent your kids through this. And so there's this organization called Axis, and they have put out a parent's guide to talking to your kids about racial diversity. So it's not specific to TCKs, but it goes through the history. It goes through, why is this an important conversation? What happened in the past to cause this to be something that we have to talk about today? And so it's something that as a parent, it's not necessarily what you're going to read to your child, but it helps you to feel like I can get the education that I need so that I can make educated conversation happen with my peers, with my children, and I can make educated decisions on how and when and why I want to start those conversations. And so I think we have a link to that particular guide. So Axis puts out parent guides for lots of different things. This particular one they have made free right now. So if that's something that you want to take advantage of, I think in general there may be like $3.99. They're not super expensive, but this one is free download PDF. If you just want to I want to read about this, I want to know how to have that conversation. And then recently, Nickelodeon did a special led by Alicia Keys on just talking to kids about this conversation. And so, again, it is not faith-based. It's not going to have a biblical worldview, but it is just about kids, particularly they are American kids that are dealing with this on a stronger level right now, as in America, there are lots of very passionate things happening that kids are witnessing, even if their parents aren't ready to have the conversation. It's hard to protect them from it here. Yeah. And so this is just a little special kind of talking to kids about their ability to have a voice and make change. And so I would encourage you, if you're interested, to watch it first yourself, to maybe decide, is this something I want to watch with my kids? Is this something I think would be a good thing? But there are just a couple of resources that I became familiar with that I thought, this might be helpful to share on this topic as well.
Those sound so good. Can I add two suggestions? Well, specifically, you asked me before, like talking to TCKs about tough conversations, and that's like Kaleidoscope's jam. We love creating space for TCKs to have good and hard conversations. And, sometimes that gets to be with like trusted adults that aren't parents, and sometimes needs to be with parents, or maybe there's not the opportunity to have that conversation with the other adults in your life. And something that we train all our volunteers on is like, when you're talking to kids, always listen more than you talk. And I think that's so, well, in this instance, I would be so curious, like how that conversation plays out. Again, like thinking about what your kids are hearing and retaining for themselves, and maybe even have learned just from their lived experience. And as adults, I love to talk, obviously. And it's always so hard to be like, no, like this is like my kids have something valuable to say, like not only that, but they're processing their own experience. So we talk a lot about like listening more than you talk. And we also try to ask open-ended questions, which is like the hardest thing to do in the world. But if you want the cheat sheet, open-ended questions are like, they cannot be answered by one or two words. So not like, how was your day? Or did you see this on TV? But like, how did that make you feel when you saw this? Or tell me something interesting about your day, or tell me something hard about your day. That can't just be like, yes, no, good, bad. And as you guys start to dive into some of these places and spaces with your kids, that maybe those are 2 tips to hang on to.
I really appreciate the different points of view and the different wisdom that you guys have brought from your experiences. And I love, oh, hello. I love that. Who are we getting to say hi to there?
That's my oldest. They've been away, so she popped in.
I'm so
Miss
glad. Welcome. We're so excited that you popped in. Hey. But we recognize that you guys are all really busy, and I appreciate you taking the time to sit with us, to share your heart. I know that this isn't something that you just are flippant about. It's something that is personal to you, and that you are in the midst of making these decisions in a time when everything is changing so fast. And so I appreciate your sharing with us, taking the time to do that. And I appreciate you guys online that have popped in to listen. I hope this was encouraging to you, and I hope that, you know, we've given you some resources to help keep this conversation going where you're at. So if you aren't watching this live, we hope that you're able to scroll through the chat and find the resources that we're going to hook there. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Velvet Ashes or Kaleidoscope. And even if it's for one of our guests today, Jenny or Ashley, we would be happy to get those questions to them and try to get the answers for you. So anyway, hey ladies, this has been the highlight of my day. I feel such a privilege to get to share screen space with you. So thank you. Thank you so very much. And Ashley, we hope you get to go to bed soon.
Thanks.
All right. All right.
Thank
We'll
you
talk
so
to
much
you
for
guys.
hosting. This was
Oh,
amazing.
you're so welcome.
Yes, thank you.
I love it. And I just want to say that we are doing this Summer Live series for the month of July, and our next Summer Live is going to be next Thursday. And we're going to have an Ask a Nurse. We're going to be when you have to navigate medical issues overseas and the challenges that presents. And so we're excited to have that conversation with you. So we hope that you'll join us back here next week. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.